Have you ever noticed this security checkbox in the properties of a file you downloaded from the internet? You might be surprised to know that every file you download will show this unblock option, even image files. But not every file on your computer will show this, even files you had downloaded at some point. And it's actually important to know about all this because some programs like 7-Zip have default settings that remove this security feature by default for files, leaving you vulnerable, which I'll go over. Now, despite every downloaded file showing this, you're probably thinking, well, I don't really notice many files being blocked. But it does happen sometimes where Windows will show a warning window like this saying Windows protected your PC and talking about an unrecognized app. But what does that mean? Well, that part is actually pretty straightforward. Basically, when you run a file, Windows has a bunch of checks and factors to determine whether it's trustworthy. One of the factors is whether the file was downloaded, but I'll explain how it keeps track of that next. It's probably not what you think. But a really big factor is the file's reputation. Assuming you have the reputation-based protection options enabled in Windows Security, which you definitely should, Windows takes note of the unique hash of the file it's called, and checks with some cloud database to see if either the file has been flagged either as a virus or alternatively is flagged as trusted. You see, Windows is on so many computers that it can kind of observe the behavior of files and programs, and once it has enough data to determine, okay, this file is fine, doesn't do anything nasty, then from my understanding, it gets marked as safe for future checks. And in many cases, it might look at other factors, like if it's signed by a trusted certificate, and then it trusts the file instantly, even if the file hasn't been seen before. So the unrecognized app thing just means that the file isn't necessarily a virus, but it doesn't have enough reputation info to make a decision either way, so it blocks it. Of course, that's if the user hasn't checked the unblock option. As for how it decides when to show the block option, well, that's next. Now, something else that I bet most people wish they could block is all our data being leaked in data breaches, which is where today's sponsor comes in, Aura. You've probably already heard about how the data records, including social security numbers, of pretty much every American was leaked online after being stolen from a company suitably named National Public Data, which is in the business of offering background checks to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, stuff like that. However, those records also include full name, address, date of birth, phone number, along with alternate names and birth date. But what makes this one worse than usual is that it was all released by the hackers online for free to any criminal who wants it, whereas oftentimes these get sold privately or collected by some nation-state actor. If only there was some way to protect yourself. Well, there is. It's Aura. I'm sure no one saw that coming. For example, Aura will alert me if they find my phone number, social security number, or other sensitive info has been compromised, and they'll send fast fraud alerts if anyone tries to use that data to access my credit or bank accounts. They even give up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst happen. But Aura also has a bunch of other features too, like transaction monitoring, a VPN, antivirus, a password manager, parental controls, all in one app. So if you don't want to leave you and your family vulnerable, go to aura.com/Theojo and try your first 2 weeks free. Link is also in the description. And with all that being said, let's continue. Okay, so how does Windows decide when to show this unblock option? Well, it all has to do with something called the mark of the web, and it's actually a very special kind of hidden file that you can't see even if you enable viewing both hidden files and system files in Windows Explorer. One of the few ways to even know that they're there is in the command prompt to use the dir command for directory. And if you use this special argument, /r, you'll notice that there are a bunch of these files that have the same name as another, but they say zone identifier and other weird stuff. These are actually called alternate data streams, and I made a whole separate video about them you can watch next. But basically, they're sort of like a special metadata file that attaches to any regular file, but not all files. And you can actually see inside them. To see what's inside the alternate data stream, you can use Notepad via the command prompt and specify the full name, including the stuff after the colon. And it will open this file, which is otherwise invisible. Zone identifier is just one type of alternate data stream, and like I show in my other video, they can actually have any name and actually be any file type. You can even attach a hidden image file to a text file if you want. However, the zone identifier one is what we're looking at today because that is the so-called mark of the web. And anytime you download a file, your web browser will tell Windows to add this data. But what does it all mean? Well, the referral URL and host URL are easy. Host URL is the link of the actual download location the file came from, and referral URL is the URL of the page you were on where you clicked the download link. So if you're browsing on one website, but there's a download link where the file is actually hosted on some other service, the mark of the web will note both of them. And this gives antiviruses more data to determine whether to trust a file or not. So maybe if Windows doesn't recognize some file, but it comes from a website known to be malicious, it knows for sure to block it anyway. Now, the zone ID is pretty interesting, though you'll basically only ever see a value of 3. The term zone refers to one of 5 possible security zones, signifying where the file came from. And actually, if you search the start menu for internet options and go to the security tab, you can see these zones here. Zone 1 corresponds to local intranet, aka your local network or organizational domain. Zone 2 is the trusted sites zone, which is defined by a list you can set. 3 is the internet zone, and 4 is the restricted sites zone, which is also a list. There is also technically a zone 0, which is just the local computer. Oh, and as for that unblock button, well, selecting that or choosing to run a file if Windows popped up a warning, doing either of those simply deletes the alternate data stream file, so it won't show the warning and no longer shows the unblock message in the properties. As for the zone transfer thing, that's basically just a header. It's not an actual setting. Basically, the syntax is that of an INI file. And be aware that this Internet Options menu technically is a holdover from Internet Explorer, so I'm not sure which of these settings will actually do anything, but I did try adding Google as a restricted site, and sure enough, when I downloaded the Google Doodle image and looked at the mark of the web, it had Zone 4, restricted. You can also go into the group policy editor to this path, where you can set a policy called Site to Zone Assignment List, which will also work for assigning these zones. Though interestingly, when I assigned a website to Zone 1, it doesn't even add a mark of the web at all. And if you take an executable file and change the zone to 4 so it's restricted, Windows will probably not let you even run it at all, though there might be some other system policies that override that, because it doesn't stop it on my main desktop where I have Smart App Control enabled, and I think that might be using its own reputation system, but it does block it on another system, and I noticed it doesn't even give you the option to override it. Also, it doesn't stop opening image files and stuff, it just seems to stop executables. I assume that the reason it applies the mark of the web to all file types, not just executables, is if, for example, it's an executable that's downloaded with a different file extension or it gets changed, it can still know to block it. Also, I figured out that local intranet probably more means a company domain network, not a home network. I tried downloading a file from my NAS, and despite it literally being on my local network, it still had Zone 3 internet. Though the mark of the web isn't just useful for applications. Microsoft announced a couple years back that it would be blocking macro scripts on Microsoft Office files like Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, if they had been downloaded from the internet, meaning they have a mark of the web. So it's an important security feature all around. But we are not done, because you might remember I mentioned some default settings some programs have that leave you vulnerable. And that is because of how they handle archives like zip files or zip folders, whatever you call it. You see, zip files do not support alternate data streams. And a long time ago, hackers realized they could avoid their malware getting tagged with a mark of the web by simply putting the virus in a zip file. So when it gets extracted, it's less likely to be blocked. Now, if you use the built-in extract all feature in the Windows context menu, it will actually take whatever mark of the web was on the zip folder and also apply it to anything that gets extracted out of it. However, not every archiving tool does this. In fact, 7-Zip, one of the most popular free archiving tools, does not by default. You have to actually go into the options and look for a setting that for 99.99% of people has the meaningless cryptic name Propagate Zone ID Stream, then change that to yes. And now that you actually know what that means, you can go enable it, and you should. As for why 7-Zip doesn't do it by default, well, according to one of the developers, he doesn't like that feature. But hey, at least they added the option after that person asked, because before it wasn't even possible. There's actually a GitHub page that I'll link in the description where someone has been keeping track of which archiving tools do propagate it by default, or if they even support it at all. And I was glad to see that WinRAR, which, yes, I did pay for a while ago, does indeed apply the Zone ID info to extracted files by default, or at least certain executables and Office files. So if you don't use any third-party tools, you're fine, but if you do, be sure to check that it does propagate that. So now I think you can officially consider yourself a PhD level expert on the mark of the web, and you can drop technical terms to impress all your friends. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring the video. If you don't want to leave you and your family vulnerable, go to aura.com/TheoJoe and try your first 2 weeks free. Link in the description. Next, definitely check out my other video where I talk about alternate data streams and how you can make your own super hidden files. I can put that link right there. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a big giant thumbs up, all that good stuff. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.